Well, an American scholar based in the UK, that's talking about Professor Eric Anderson, says one woman to a man is not enough, and he blames society for stigmatizing a man who wants to have multiple women. And he's saying monogamy is failing men. Not only is it failing them, but it is a socially compelled sexual incarceration that can lead to a life of anger and contempt, so says Anderson, the American sociologist at England's University of Winchester and author of the provocative new book, The Monogamy Gap, Men, Love and the Reality of Cheating. So join me in welcoming Professor Anderson to this exclusive on polygamy. Prof.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's start with this. You say monogamy is failing men, and it is also a socially compelled sexual incarceration for men, which can lead to a life of anger and concept. Can you please explain that?
Well, let's begin by saying that monogamy may also be failing women. But I study men. My expertise is masculinities, so I focused on just men for this particular research project. But monogamy may very well be failing women as well. We know that monogamy has been failing men, and we know that monogamy has been failing men for over 60 years. Because 60 years ago, we initiated the first research into the rates of men who cheat on their partners. And we found 60 years ago that it was around 35 or 40%. Today, we show that it's about 70 to 75%. And it doesn't matter which culture you look at, it really doesn't matter which age demographic you look at, men cheat. And what this tells us is that the notion of monogamy, the belief that a man is going to have sex with just one partner, and in my book I interview both gay and straight men, so this is not just about straight men, we find that they're just not pleased with one sexual partner for life. In fact, they're not pleased with just one sexual partner for even 6 months or so. After a period of time with one partner, despite how much they love that partner, the sex starts to become routine, and they start desiring sex with somebody else. And the myth is that they can spice it up. They can do something different to make them be reinvested in their partners. And this is a myth, because the reality is what they desire is not different sex, more exotic sex with the same partner. What they really desire is sex with somebody else. So this is a fascinating scenario. What we have is this: the longer a couple is together, the more emotional investment they have in each other, the more love they generate. But the longer a couple is together, the less they desire sex with each other, and the more they desire sex with somebody else.
So it's like it's working the opposite directions.
Absolutely. In fact, I like to say that when the sex dies, the relationship has just begun.
Yeah, according to your book, men want to be emotionally monogamous, but their body craves sex with other people. And but the thing is, if men can have sex, self-control rather, over other cravings like food, alcohol, and other things, why not control over their body in terms of sex?
Well, the first thing I would say is that when I say that men desire emotional monogamy, this was a study conducted in the West on men who've been socially constructed to value emotional intimacy with just one other. And of course, men may desire multiple lovers to have emotional relationships as well. But for the most part, most men want emotional monogamy. They just don't want the sexual monogamy, right? But the question then becomes is, well, why shouldn't they control their why should they not control their sexual desires? As you've said, they control other aspects. But do we really? Are human beings very good at controlling their drinking behaviors, their violence, their food? We're not. We are incredibly addictive creatures, and we don't manage those other things very well. But the difference is this. One can very easily argue, that alcohol and illicit drugs have an incredibly damning effect on one's body. They're also very expensive. One can argue that overeating has a very harmful effect on one's body. But sexual recreation, when practiced safely, can be very safe. So there's less stigma for the men, well, there should be less stigma for partaking in those things than there are in drugs or overeating or alcohol consumption.
Yeah, but looking at the stigma, why is it that men get away with it and women are always looked down upon in the society if they do what men had been doing over the years?
for having multiple sexual partners.
Yeah.
This is changing. This is called the double. Pardon me. This is called what's it called? Anyway, there's an unfair practice traditionally that says that when men have sex, that makes them more manly, it makes them studs. When women have sex, it makes them stigmatized, it makes them essentially sluts. But this double standard is eroding. Women are beginning to have, particularly in the West, women are having more sex, recreational sex, without stigma. So this generation has thrown off all types of stigma from the past. Homosexuality is no longer stigmatized the way it used to be. Oral sex is no longer stigmatized. Anal sex is no longer stigmatized. Pornography is no longer stigmatized. Today's youth grow up with all of these things. They embrace them. They have very little difficulty with them. The one thing that has not changed, however, is their belief that they should have sex with only their partner. Monogamy has retained its cultural strength despite the fact that everything else is changing.
Yeah, okay, let's quickly talk about infidelity. It's one of the strongest factors when you talk about divorce, which has reached an alarming rate,
Indeed.
especially in Europe and other developed parts of the world. Don't you think your book would end up encouraging people to lie, to deceive their partners?
I don't think my book could encourage people to do this any more than they already are.
Okay.
And most all men are doing this. So we know, for example, that about 3/4 of men cheat. We know that married men with children are more likely to cheat than married men without children. So just because one puts a wedding ring on doesn't stop men from cheating. So what I'm suggesting is men are already doing this. All over the world, men are doing this, regardless of the religious faith. If men are already doing this, we need to understand why men are doing this. And when we begin to look at it, I'm showing that they're doing it simply because they desire sex. Not because they fail to love their partners, not because they're horrible, rotten human beings, but quite simply because monogamy does not work very well for them. They want that recreational sex with somebody else. If my book gives people the opportunity to feel better about their cheating, to feel less guilty about their cheating, then to me, that's a good thing. And better yet, if my book begins a conversation in which people begin to talk about having open sexual relationships, where they're permitted to go off and have sex with other people, then that is truly a fantastic thing.
Yeah, but it's like, let's look at cultures around the world, especially where polygamy is being sanctioned, especially in Africa. The men tend to want to go out and do it confidently, but they wouldn't want to hear their partners doing such a thing. Why is that so?
Yes, well, this is sexual ownership. We know that men are actually more jealous about the idea of their partners having sex than women are. On the other hand, when cheating is divulged, women are twice as likely to break up with their partners as men are. So men have higher rates of jealousy, but then when it comes down to it, they won't break up as often. Women are more likely to break up. Well, I forgot what your question was. I apologize.
Yeah, we were looking at the reason why, like in Africa, like men would go out
and not want their partners to do the same.
And they wouldn't want
Yes.
So why is that prevalent?
Yes.
With men.
And this is quite simply that we haven't been able to shed ourselves from the belief that our partners are supposed to be sexually faithful to us. We want to go off and do something, but we don't want our partners to do it. And it's not just with sex, it's not just with monogamy that we do this. Talking about texting while driving, a friend of mine said, well, it's okay when I do it, just not when everybody else does it. So this belief that I'm an exception, well, this is endemic with humanity, isn't it? But we do know that men strongly desire sex more than women. We know that in cultures where all stigma has been removed, that gay men, for example, living in San Francisco will have more sexual partners than lesbian women living in San Francisco. Okay. We know that this is the case all over the world. So men are seeking recreational sex more than women are. It's not to say that women don't want it, but men are seeking it more than they are. But they don't want their heterosexual partners to have that same privilege as they have. And this is what's interesting about cheating, is cheating is a rational solution for men. So here's the problem. They get into the relationships, they're absolutely in love with their partners, they don't want to cheat on their partners. Many of them have come from divorced families, and they say, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be faithful to my partner. And this is easy to do for a while. In the first 3 or maybe even 6 months of a relationship, the sex is amazing. It's new, it's exciting, but eventually it starts to become routine. We get used to the same thing over and over again, and we try to spice it up. But even after that, we still want sex with somebody else. So at this point, men find themselves in a dilemma. They say, I'm absolutely in love with him or her. I don't want to change that. I don't want to lose the relationship, but I definitely want sex with somebody else. Cheating presents a rational choice for men. Because if they say to their partners, honey, I love you, but I want sex with somebody else, they're going to get slapped and probably broken up with. If they say, for example, a famous American politician in the news this week, Newt Gingrich, his wife, one of his former wives, has said that he asked for an open relationship. And what did she do? She broke up with him. And so men tell me, if I say to my partner, I would like to be in an open sexual relationship where we can have casual sex with people on the side, I'm going to lose that partner. Not wanting to lose their partners, the only rational choice becomes to cheat. And then it has the added advantage. Men can have all of the sex they want, and it keeps their women faithful to them because they don't allow their women to have the same privilege. So it may be a dirty trick, but cheating is a very rational solution to the dilemma that men find themselves in of wanting sex with somebody else, but wanting to retain the emotional strength of the relationship with their primary partner.
Okay, yeah, let's look at, let's still go back to Africa.
Okay.
Several years back, the African men would go for multiple partners and had several children because of famine then. But like now, there is urbanization, things are changing all over the world. Don't you think polygamy is getting out of tune to every society?
I'm not anti-polygamy, not in any capacity. I am in favor of full gender equality. So I do believe that if a man should have the right to marry 4 women, then a woman should have the right to marry 4 men. And I understand that there are structural reasons why countries have prevented this. They're worried about chains of families getting out of control. But isn't it convenient that men have created the laws that say they can have 4 wives, but the women can't have 4 husbands? Polygamy has had a very vital purpose in pre-industrial societies, particularly in agricultural nations. Very important to the strength of the society. So I'm not against polygamy, and I'm not against polyamory in any capacity. This notion that people can have more than one emotional and physical lover at the same time. Why should we just have one-on-one when we can have more than one? So I'm not against that in any capacity. And I understand that Africa is moving to disassociate itself with polygamy. But part of that is also economic in nature, not just cultural. And part of that is because, according to Islam, one can have 4 wives, but one has to treat all wives equally. Right? Well, that is increasingly hard to do in modern society. To buy a house for 4 individual wives and all of the other things, very difficult to do. So what's happening, of course, is men are saying, well, I'll just marry the one woman and I'll cheat to get my sex on the side so that I can have the sex without having to sponsor 4 wives.
And that reminds me of the issue of the issue in Islam. Like they said, you can marry 4 wives, but you have to treat them the same way. Equally. But it's like, don't you think that people are using Islam to cheat? Like instead of like trying to legalize it through Islam, because it's not possible to love them the same way, provide them with the same things in the society. But it's like, don't you think people are trying to use Islam to achieve their aim of cheating?
Well, I don't want to indict Islam. I think people have religious faith and they believe in different things, and people have different motives for their individual behaviors. But what I will say is, regardless of religious faith, people want to cheat on their primary partners because they want sex with somebody else. Even if an Islamic man has 4 wives, that doesn't mean he's going to be satisfied with sex with just those 4 wives either. So cheating occurs. In fact, I know that in Togo, recent research has shown that 37% of married men have cheated in the previous year. Not ever cheated in the previous year. And of course, cheating is easier and easier to do, particularly as we move from agrarian life to major cities. There's a higher density of people. It's easier to find recreational sex. It's easier to find sex on the internet these days. You can find sex, particularly in the West. You could pull out your phone, you can pull up an app, and you can find people who are interested in having sex with you regardless of your sexuality. For example, on the iPhone, there's an application called Grindr for gay men. Very easy, it pinpoints them with GPS that shows them all over the place, men who are looking for sex. AshleyMadison.com is a website mostly for heterosexuals. There's 11 million registered users who are looking to cheat on their married spouses. 11 million registered users. So this clearly shows that monogamy might exist as the cultural ideal, but privately, people want something different.
Okay.
They may be afraid to say that, but they do.
Okay, well, what about the legal and religious implications? Because, like, you can practice polygamy in so many countries, and then the religious bodies, especially Christianity, frown against the practice. What do you think about that?
Well, all major religions have had polygamy at one point or time in their history. And if there's anything you can be sure with any of the Abrahamic religions, is they will change their tune as they desire. Right? So that this notion, for example, that marriage is about one man and one woman, that you hear repeated in the West, well, that's absolute and complete and total rubbish. They know very well that under Christianity, multiple wives were acceptable, that the Catholic Church, in fact, married two men before the Catholic Church married a man and a woman. So this notion that marriage has always been one man, one woman is completely erroneous. And any religious leader who tells you otherwise is either completely ignorant of their religious history or they're downright lying to you. So marriage changes its practices depending on the political powers who are in, what they determine that they believe is morally acceptable. Religion changes as the mores of the time change. And we can see this occurring in Africa now. We can see that Africa was not interested in laws against homosexuality until the oppressive British came along and forced their homophobic laws onto Africa. And now that Britain has lost those homophobic laws, Africa is struggling with issues of homosexuality. With many countries it's illegal. A few countries there's the death penalty. And in other countries like South Africa, men can actually be married together. So I would say that this isn't a matter of religion. This is a matter of people speaking their mind in the name of religion.
Okay, but like I was discussing with somebody about the issue of polygamy, and the first thing that came to the person's mind was like the fact that the evil associated with polygamy is much more than what you should even try to experiment with. So it's like, don't you think that we should look at what happens at the end of the day, or maybe the implications of practicing polygamy? Like in Africa, you have several women. There is always a quarrel. The children don't like each other, and it's always leading to fatalities at times. What do you think about that?
I think that all governments should be careful in creating legislation that says that adults have lost their free will. And if adults want to enter into a polyamorous or polygamous relationship, then adults should have that right. As long as they're free from economic hardship, as long as they're making the choices out of their own volition, then I'm not in favor of a government trying to tell individuals or groups of people how they must live their sexual and romantic lives. This is the same line with homosexuality. The church has absolutely no business influencing the laws of the land, creating homophobic laws. Adults should be able to do what they choose to do, and this is something that I believe comes to us as the freedom of our own will. What happens in one's bedroom, what happens in one home, doesn't affect other people. Polygamous marriages are recognized, for example, by the United Kingdom. If a triad was together, a man had multiple wives in another country and immigrates to the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom will recognize that relationship. And if my next door neighbors are polygamous, in no way, shape, or form does that hurt me. And if my next door neighbors are a same-sex male couple, in no way, shape, or form does that hurt me. And if my neighbor next door has been divorced 5 times, again, that doesn't hurt me. So I think these are matters of free will and free agency, and we should be free to make these choices regardless of one's religious beliefs.
Yeah, and that leads me to the issue of divorce, like having somebody who has divorced 5 times.
Yes.
Do you think there's any difference between him and the person who is having 5 partners?
Well, in fact, no. All that really is serial monogamy. And so here's what, for example, today's youth are doing. They're free to have recreational sex. They no longer have to be, ready to be married before they can have sex. Or certainly, they don't have to be married to have sex anymore. So university students all throughout the West are having sex like crazy, right? But they have to be in love with the individual, or at least under the pretense that they're going to potentially date. Now, this is beginning to change, and they're starting to allow themselves to have recreational sex. But it used to be, particularly when we were growing up, it was okay to have sex as long as it was with your partner. Well, so what men would do is they would pretend to be interested in a girl, they would have sex with her, then they break up with her, then they go to another girl, they'd be interested in her, they'd have sex with her, they break up with her, right? And of course, many men would do this in marriages as well. They have sex and they break up. By allowing ourselves to have sex without the stigma, to have just recreational sex without stigma, by allowing both men and women the right to have sexual recreation without emotional investment, then we can begin to erode at that system of serial monogamy. Men won't be trapped into marriages so that they can have the sex and then divorce and have someone else. It's the same thing with decreasing cultural homophobia. By decreasing cultural homophobia, you're no longer forcing gay men and lesbians to marry in heterosexual relationships, only then to break up 20 years later and say, look, I've actually never been in love with you. I just had to do this because my culture is so homophobic. So what I'm suggesting is when we remove the stigma about sexual practices, it's actually better for all involved.
Yeah, and finally, I want to look at the idea of people running away from marriage these days, especially in the Western world. You could have people having partners for 20 years, 30 years. Maybe could it be because they want to have the opportunity of cheating without the hassles of getting through divorce?
Well, I think men do cheat so that they can have the sex without a hassle of getting through divorce. I think the real problem is, though, the reason I wrote the book is I've seen so many fine couples. A couple that's been together for, as you say, 20 years, and maybe they have kids together, and they've got a mortgage together, and they've got a great life together, and they have lots of history together. And it's a very functioning couple. But the man runs off and has sex because he has sexual desires that he wants to have met. And the woman is taught by society that she's supposed to be victimized by it, that it's the ultimate betrayal of their love. And I argue that, well, no, it's not. It's not an ultimate betrayal in any capacity. And I suggest if you're going to divorce your partner and you're going to rid yourself of that amazing history you have together, do it for a more substantial reason than just who one had an orgasm with. And this applies for both men and women. If you're going to divorce your partner because the relationship is not functioning well anymore. Not because there's a lack of sex, or not because somebody else has run off and had sex on the side while they're away on a business trip. Divorce your partners only if the relationship is emotionally unhealthy. Other than that, divorcing somebody simply because of who they had sex with, that's really a short-sighted venture, because divorce doesn't help anybody. It's hard on the kids, it's hard on those being divorced. And I argue, if we didn't expect lifelong monogamy, we would have a lot less divorce.
Yeah, and in newspaper investigation recently said like a lot of people were talking about losing the interest in their partners because the children have all grown up, they've gone out of the house to get married to their own partners, and they're no longer interested in their partner they've been married to for 20, 30, 40 years just because the children moved away. Any relationship between the presence of the children and their absence later?
Well, certainly couples can stay together for the sake of children, and then once children are out of the house, the couple might look at each other and realize that they actually don't have that much in common anymore. Certainly that can happen. And in cases like that, I'm not saying that couples should remain together. Particularly when the kids are out of the house, let them have the freedom to do as they will. But there's a real difference between today's youth and the older generation. In many essences, the older generation, they feel like they invented sex. And this is what happened. They weren't allowed to have sex before marriage. Finally, they got married, they began to have sex. But they didn't have pornography to really see all of the different things they could do in bed together. And so, essentially, they felt like they invented sex. And they got a much longer lifespan out of their sexual lives. But today's youth, they grow up in a completely different culture. First of all, they begin consuming pornography around age 11, oftentimes earlier. So by the time a youth enters his sexual maturity, he already knows everything about sex. He's seen it all, he knows all of the positions, he knows all of the, you name it, he knows it, right? So in that essence, they've already been desensitized to sex. So that when they begin having sex, they also begin having sex at a younger age. We don't have to wait till we're married anymore to have sex. So in England, people are losing their virginities at 14, 15. 16 is considered a bit late these days. They're having sex, and they're having sex with multiple people because they no longer have to be in a relationship to have that sex. So they're having sex with friends and sex with strangers from a younger age. They've got all of the pornography. It's available on their smartphones. Sex is absolutely everywhere. What this means is that the sexual life they get out of any one monogamous relationship doesn't last nearly as long as it did for their grandparents. They're already desensitized to the sex. And what that means is that today's youth generation is going to have to face this issue of monogamy in a way which is much stronger than those from the generations past. Not only do they want sex quicker, but it's easier to get that sex. So grandparents may have wanted, perhaps grandpa wanted to cheat on grandma, but it wasn't so easy to do. But today, boy, it's really easy. With the internet, it's really easy.
So it could be the reason why marriages in the past lasted for so long, even lasted into eternity. But nowadays, like marriage, just like a few years, they pack it up.
Absolutely. Wow. And think about this. In the 1950s in the West, we erroneously and absolutely quite stupidly believed that masturbation was an evil. That we believed since the dawn of the 20th century, really up until the late 1980s, that 1990s really, that masturbation would lead to all kinds of health problems. It's absolutely a joke. There's no basis for it whatsoever, and quite the opposite. Masturbation is very healthy. It's a fantastic outlet. It's good for the body, right? So married men in the 50s and 60s and 70s, if they divorced, that would mean that their regular source of sex would end. And they believed that masturbating was bad for them, that it would make them mentally deranged. Well, there's a lot more reason to stay with your partner. But today, men are free to masturbate. They don't need to have a woman in order to have that orgasm. They can have it on their own, so they're less likely to stay with a partner that they're unhappy with because they're allowed to have that sexual outlet regardless of what society now permits them to have that sexual outlet.
Thank you very much, Professor, and it's nice having you, and we hope we'll be able to quickly lay our hands on the book, The Monogamy Gap, Men, Love, and the Reality of Cheating, which will be out in the book markets very, very soon. So it's nice having you with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Same here.